My daughter's smile was a little too bright, a little too fixed when she handed me the eggnog. That's the first thing I knew, deep in my bones, that something was wrong. It wasn't the drink itself, steam curling from my grandmother's cut crystal punch cup, smelling of nutmeg and bourbon. It was her eyes, watching me too closely, and the strange, rigid way she held her own cup, untouched. If you've ever felt that chill, that sudden, silent alarm bell in your own blood, you're not alone. Stay with me. If you want to hear more stories like mine, stories of quiet battles fought and won, subscribe to the channel. You belong here. Most Christmases, Chloe breezed in and out of my home like a fashionable ghost, more interested in the lighting for her Instagram stories than the stuffing recipe I'd used for 40 years. But this year, my only daughter had been attentive, helpful. She'd insisted on making the family eggnog from scratch, a tradition she'd always rolled her eyes at. "Your special recipe, Mom," she'd said, her voice smooth as the silk of her blouse. "I know how much it means to you. Drink up, it's still warm." I didn't drink. I held the cool crystal and looked at my son-in-law, Mark. He was suddenly fascinated with the fireplace, poking at a log that was burning just fine. His own cup sat on the mantel beside him, full. The room was a symphony of Christmas, twinkling white lights on the tree, the scent of pine and gingerbread, my grandson Leo laughing at something on his phone in the corner. And in the center of it all, this terrible, smiling stillness between my child and me. Maybe it was the way she'd asked me twice that week if I'd been feeling dizzy lately. Maybe it was the offhand comment Mark had made last month about how cozy the guest house would be for me if the big house ever got to be too much. Maybe it was just a lifetime of knowing the subtle shift in Chloe's voice when she wanted something. A mother knows, even when she wishes she didn't. My fingers moved before my mind could form a coherent thought, a simple, casual reach. I set my cup on the mantel next to Mark's and picked up his. "Yours looks fuller, dear," I said, my voice sounding miles away. "I'm feeling a bit festive." Chloe's smile shattered. "Mom, no, that's Mark's. I made yours special." The words were too fast, too sharp. They hung in the air like the echo of a slapped face. I merely took a sip from Mark's cup. Cool, bland, store-bought eggnog, barely a hint of spice. "Tastes fine," I said, and took another, longer drink. The next 20 minutes unfolded in slow, surreal motion. Mark began to rub his temples. He mumbled something about the heat. By the time the carolers arrived on the porch, led by my neighbor, Mrs. Henderson, he was slumped in the wingback chair, his words slurring into nonsense, his eyes unable to focus. Chloe fluttered around him, a portrait of frantic concern, shooting me glances that were pure venom. She called their family doctor, speaking in low, urgent tones about a possible reaction, maybe the bourbon, so sudden. No one asked how I was. No one seemed to remember the switched cups. I sat on the sofa, my hands folded in my lap, watching the reflected colors of the tree lights dance on the ceiling, and felt a cold, hard certainty settle in my chest. At 67 years old, I had just been shown the truth. The eggnog in my own cup, my special recipe, had held something extra, something meant for me. The official story by Boxing Day was that Mark had a sudden, severe migraine, likely triggered by holiday stress and dehydration. Chloe announced it over a tense, silent breakfast, her eyes daring me to contradict her. Leo, my sweet, observant 19-year-old grandson, just pushed his pancakes around his plate, his gaze flicking between my mother and me. "You must have been so worried, Mom," Chloe said, pouring me more orange juice I didn't want. "Seeing him like that, it's scary when things happen so fast, especially at our age. Makes you realize how vulnerable we are." Our age. She was 42. I was the one with the silver hair and the slightly creaky knee. The subtext was as clear as the crystal she'd tried to poison me with. I told her I was tired, that the excitement had worn me out. I needed to go home. My home, the cedar-shingled cottage on the other side of town that I bought with my late husband Ben a lifetime ago. She protested, of course. They had plans, a movie night, but I was already pulling on my coat, my movements steady and deliberate. I kissed Leo on the top of his head. "Call me tomorrow, sweetheart," I whispered. He just nodded, his eyes full of a confusion he couldn't voice. The drive home was quiet. The world was wrapped in the hushed post-Christmas afternoon, all stripped wrapping paper and exhaustion. But inside my car, inside me, a storm was brewing. Not of panic, but of a furious, clarifying focus. I had been naive. I had seen the little things, the loans that were never repaid, the subtle criticisms about my clutter, the way they'd started talking about my finances as if they were a shared problem, and I had explained them away. My daughter was stressed, the economy was tough, I was getting overly sensitive in my grief. But you cannot explain away a too bright smile and a doctored cup of eggnog. That night, in the profound silence of my own cottage, I didn't sleep. I made tea from a new sealed box and sat at the kitchen table Ben had built. The house, usually a comfort, felt like a crime scene. Every object, every memory was now a potential piece of evidence in a case I hadn't known was being built against me. The cinnamon-scented candle she'd given me for my birthday, the cozy fleece blanket from Mark. Were they gifts or set dressing for my eventual decline? At 2:17 a.m., a text chimed on my phone, its blue light harsh in the dark room. Chloe. "Hope you're resting. Mark's better. Doctor said it was probably a one-off thing, but it's a wake-up call about monitoring our health. We should talk soon. Love you." No apology, no inquiry. A directive. We should talk soon. I didn't reply. Instead, I walked down the hall to the small study, to the filing cabinet Ben had always teased me for being so meticulous about. Miriam's Fortress of Solitude, he'd called it. Inside were the archives of our life together: mortgage papers, tax returns, insurance policies, birth certificates, death certificates. And a blue folder Chloe had given me last Mother's Day. "Just some updates for your patient file at the new medical center, Mom," she'd said, her voice dripping with solicitous care. "They need all this on record now, HIPAA and all that. I had my notary friend at work witness it, so it's all official. One less thing for you to worry about." I had signed. Of course I had. She was my daughter, handing me a pen, pointing to the highlighted lines. I was distracted by the brunch she'd made, touched by the gesture. I'd scribbled my signature, Miriam Delaney, without reading a single paragraph. Now, under the glow of the desk lamp, I read every word. It was not a medical form. It was a durable power of attorney for finances and property, granting one Chloe Marie Benson full unilateral authority over all my assets, accounts, and real estate in the event of my incapacity. The definition of incapacity was broad, vague. It could be triggered by a doctor's note, a doctor like the one she'd called for Mark, perhaps. The final page held my signature, witnessed and notarized by someone named Lisa Torres on May 12th. The notary stamp was crisp, official, a perfect legal trap. My hands didn't tremble. They were ice. A strange calm descended. This was the map. The switched cup was the first move, but this document was the endgame. Confuse me, discredit me, get a doctor to agree, and then, poof. Miriam Delaney, reduced to a file in her daughter's desk. My cottage, my savings, the modest investment portfolio Ben and I had nurtured for decades, all of it would become Chloe's to manage. I placed the document back in the folder. Then I opened my laptop. I typed an email to my attorney, Samuel Andrews, who had handled Ben's will. The words came quickly, cleanly. "Sam, I need to revoke a durable power of attorney I was misled into signing last May. I also need to appoint a new agent and discuss protecting my estate. I am completely sound mind. Can you see me first thing tomorrow?" I hit send at 3:45 a.m. At 8:02 a.m., his assistant called to confirm a 10 a.m. appointment. Sam's office was in a renovated brownstone downtown. He was around my age, with kind eyes and a no-nonsense manner Ben had always appreciated. I handed him the blue folder without preamble. He read in silence, his lips pressed into a thin line. He looked up over his reading glasses. "Miriam, do you understand what this document does?" "I do now. I did not when I signed it." "Did anyone explain it to you?" "My daughter told me it was a medical form, a routine update." He let out a long, slow breath, a sound of professional disappointment. "This is one of the broadest POAs I've seen. It gives her the power to sell your home, empty your accounts, change your will, all without a court order, based solely on a letter from a physician stating you are incapacitated. It's not illegal if properly executed, but the deception... I want it shredded today, and I want a new one naming my grandson, Leo Benson, as my sole agent for both healthcare and finances, with my neighbor, Agnes Miller, as a backup." Sam nodded, already pulling up templates on his computer. "We'll also draft a codicil to your will, explicitly stating your wishes and outlining the reasons for Chloe's disinheritance if she contests it. And I strongly recommend we place your major assets into a revocable living trust with Leo as the successor trustee. It's cleaner, harder to challenge." "Do it," I said. My voice was firm. It was the voice of the woman who had run the town's historical society for 15 years, who had balanced budgets and fought with contractors and organized 100 fundraising events. It was my voice, coming back to me. We worked for 3 hours. I read every line of every new document. I asked questions. I made him explain terms. When it came time to sign, my hand was steady. The pen made a confident scratch against the paper. Miriam Delaney. Walking out into the crisp, late December air, I felt a weight lift, but it was only the first brick removed from the wall they'd built around me. The financial wall would be thicker. I went straight from Sam's office to the Coastal Community Bank, where Ben and I had banked since 1985. I asked to speak to the manager. A young man named David Chen greeted me with a professional smile. I explained I needed a complete review of all account activity and authorizations on my primary checking, savings, and money market accounts. His fingers flew over the keyboard. His smile faded. "Mrs. Delaney, I see there is a third-party authorization on your checking account, a Chloe Benson. It was added on May 15th of this year." May 15th, 3 days after the notarized POA, of course. "What level of authorization?" "It appears to be full. She can withdraw funds, transfer funds, write checks. The memo field on the authorization form cites the power of attorney document we have on file, which is null and void as of 1 hour ago," I said, placing the revocation letter from Sam on his desk. "I want her access removed immediately. I also want to see all transaction history initiated by that authorization for the last 7 months." David worked efficiently, his expressions sober. He printed the records. We sat in a small, glass-walled office, and I pored over the statements. The regular automated transfers were what I expected, $500 every month to an account numbered with Chloe's last 4 digits, labeled Family Assistance, but it was the other items that stole my breath. A withdrawal of $1,200 on June 10th at an ATM in Napa Valley. I'd never been to Napa. Chloe and Mark took a weekend trip there in June. A check paid to Luxury Linens and Home, cleared July 5th for $2,850. I still used the linen set I'd gotten for my wedding. A payment to Pinnacle Medical Alert Systems in August for $899. I had no medical alert system. And the largest, a transfer of $25,000 on October 30th to Benson and Company LLC, Mark's struggling consulting firm. A short-term loan, Chloe had called it when she'd vaguely mentioned it over the phone, a bridge to cover payroll. She'd promised it would be repaid by year-end. It wasn't. The total, in 7 months, was just over $42,000, not enough to bankrupt me, but a significant erosion, a testing of the waters. And with the POA in place, it was all perfectly authorized. "I'd like to file a dispute for these transactions," I said, my voice quiet and even. "I did not authorize them, regardless of the document on file. The POA was obtained under false pretenses, and I was fully capable of managing my affairs at the time they were made." David's face was grim. "I'll start the paperwork. It will be a process, and you may need to involve the police for the larger fraudulent items. In the meantime, I'll lock down the accounts. 2-factor authentication for any activity. No changes without you present in this branch with ID." "Thank you," I said. I gathered the papers. The proof was in my hands. Ink on paper. Numbers in columns. The cold, hard language of betrayal. The call came that evening as I was reheating leftovers. Not on my phone, but on my landline, which only telemarketers and Chloe ever used. "Mom?" Her voice was tight, a violin string tuned too high. "David Chen from the bank called me. He said you revoked my access and are disputing transactions. What is going on? Are you having some kind of episode?" I took a deep breath. "I am having an episode of clarity, Chloe, the first in a long while." "This is insane. Those were authorized. We talked about this. The loan, the help with my expenses. You agreed." "I agreed to help my daughter. I did not agree to fund your vacation, your home decor, or your husband's failing business without my knowledge, and I certainly never agreed to sign over my entire life to you." Silence. Then a colder, lower tone, the mask fully off. "You're paranoid. You're an old woman living alone, and you're becoming confused. I've been worried about you for months. We all have. This vindictiveness proves it." "What proved it for me," I said softly, "was the eggnog. What was in it, Chloe? A little something to make me suggestible? Something to mimic a stroke? What was the next step? Rush me to the hospital while I was babbling and confused? Have your doctor friend confirm incapacity, and then serve the POA?" The gasp on the other end was real. Shocked that I knew. Shocked that I'd said it aloud. "You're sick. You need help, and I'm going to make sure you get it." The line went dead. 2 days later, Leo showed up at my door, his old Jeep pulling into the driveway. My heart, which had been armored in ice, cracked a little at the sight of his worried face. He carried a bag from my favorite bakery. "Brought you some bear claws, Grandma." We sat at the kitchen table. He didn't touch his pastry. She's really angry, Grandma. She's saying you've gone senile, that you're accusing her of crazy things. She and Mark are talking to lawyers." "I have a lawyer, Leo. A good one. And I have proof of what she's done." He stared at his hands. "I know." The whisper was so low I almost missed it. "What do you know, honey?" He looked up, his eyes, so like Ben's, filled with a painful maturity. "Last Thanksgiving, I came down early. They were in the kitchen. They didn't hear me. Mom was saying it would be easier once the paperwork was in place, that you were sentimental and stubborn and wouldn't go for assisted living willingly. Mark said something about timing it before the end of the tax year." Leo's voice broke. "I didn't want to believe it. I thought I misunderstood. But then Christmas, the way she was with your drink, and how Dad got sick." He pulled out his phone, swiped the screen a few times, and pressed play. It was a voice memo, time-stamped December 26th, 9:47 p.m. The sound was muffled, but the voices were unmistakable. "Chloe," snarling, We outsmarted us, Mark. The stupid bitch switched the cups. All that planning, the money we spent on the compound, wasted. Mark, weary. So we adjust. We get a doctor to assess her. We have the POA. We can still do this. Chloe, it's harder now. She's suspicious. We need to move faster. Maybe another incident, a fall at home, something undeniable. A clatter, like a glass being set down hard. Mark, I don't like this, Chloe. It's getting dark. Chloe, it was always dark. You wanted the money as much as I did. Don't go soft on me now. She's lived a long life, a comfortable life. It's our turn. The recording ended. The silence in my kitchen was absolute. Leo was crying, silent tears tracking down his cheeks. I'm so sorry, Grandma. I should have told you sooner. I was scared. Of them, of breaking the family. I rose and wrapped my arms around him, this tall, gentle young man. You told me now. You have nothing to be sorry for. You are the bravest person I know. What are you going to do? He mumbled into my shoulder. I am going to protect what's mine, and I am going to make sure you are protected too. I held him at arm's length. Do you trust me? He nodded, wiping his eyes. Always. The next week was a flurry of quiet, determined action. Sam filed the trust documents. The bank formally initiated the fraud investigation. I changed the locks on my cottage. I installed a simple, unobtrusive security system with cameras at the doors. I visited my doctor for a full physical and cognitive assessment, walking out with a letter on official letterhead stating, I am a sharp, cognitively intact individual with full capacity to manage my personal, medical, and financial affairs. I also, following Sam's advice, went to the police. I filed a report. Not for attempted murder, the eggnog was long gone, unprovable, but for financial fraud and theft by deception. The detective, a weary-looking woman named Rodriguez, listened carefully, took the bank statements, the POA, a copy of Leo's recording. This is primarily a civil matter, Mrs. Delaney, she said, not unkindly, but the recording and the pattern of deception could support criminal charges for the theft. We'll open an investigation. It may encourage a swifter settlement. The certified letter from Sam Andrews to Chloe arrived at her home on January 15th. It outlined the revocation of the POA, the creation of the new trust naming Leo as beneficiary and successor trustee, the police report, and a cease and desist from contacting me except through legal channels. It stated that any further attempts to question my competency or access my assets would be met with a restraining order and the full pursuit of criminal charges. The response was a volcanic eruption of voicemails, each more unhinged than the last. First, wounded. Mom, how could you, after all I've done for you? This is a betrayal I will never forgive. Then, angry. You're turning my own son against me. You're a manipulative old hag. Finally, threatening. You think you've won? You're alone. You have no one. When you fall and break your hip, you'll be at the mercy of the state, and I'll be there to make sure you get the minimum care possible. Enjoy your victory while it lasts. I saved them all. Each one was further evidence of her character. I blocked her number. Winter hardened into a bitter, icy February. My world shrank to the cozy radius of my cottage, the library where I volunteered, my weekly coffee with Agnes. It was a peaceful, if vigilant, solitude. Leo visited often, his presence a balm. He was applying for summer internships in architectural firms, his dream. Then, on a bleak Tuesday morning, the doorbell rang. A woman and a man stood on my porch, holding clipboards, their breath clouding in the cold air. The woman introduced herself as Gina from the Department of Senior and Adult Services. They had received an anonymous but deeply concerned report of self-neglect, potential financial exploitation by a third party, and cognitive decline. They were required to perform a wellness check. My heart hammered against my ribs, but my face remained calm. Chloe's next move: to use the state itself as her weapon. "Of course," I said, stepping back. "Please, come in. Would you like tea?" The assessment was thorough. They toured my clean, organized home, noted the full pantry, the well-maintained medications in their labeled weekly box. They asked about my daily routine, my social contacts, my bills. I answered calmly, clearly. Then I brought out my own file. "I believe I know the source of your report," I said, handing Gina the folder. "My daughter, Chloe Benson. We are estranged because I discovered she had fraudulently obtained a power of attorney and had been systematically stealing from me. This folder contains the revoked POA, bank statements showing unauthorized transfers totaling over $42,000, a police report number, a letter from my physician affirming my capacity, and a legal cease and desist letter sent to her. I also have a voice recording of her discussing plans to cause me harm to trigger the POA." Gina and her partner exchanged a look. They paged through the documents. The partner, an older man named Ray, whistled softly. "This is exceptionally well documented, ma'am." "I was an administrator for many years," I said. "I believe in documentation." Gina closed the folder, her demeanor shifting from bureaucratic neutrality to something akin to respect. "Mrs. Delaney, I see no evidence of self-neglect here. Quite the opposite. I'm sorry you're going through this. It's unfortunately a common story, but rarely is the parent so prepared." "What will happen with the report?" I asked. "It will be marked as unfounded and closed. The origin may be noted. If we receive further frivolous reports, it could constitute harassment, which you could act upon." She handed me her card. "You seem more than capable, but if you ever need actual resources, please call." I saw them out, standing in the doorway until their car disappeared. The cold air stung my lungs, but it felt clean. She had thrown her best bureaucratic punch, and I had parried it. She was running out of moves. Spring came tentatively, then all at once. The daffodils I'd planted with Ben burst through the thawing earth. The legal and financial wheels turned slowly. The bank recovered about half of the disputed funds after threatening to refer the case for prosecution. Chloe and Mark, through their lawyer, agreed to a settlement. They would sign a quitclaim deed affirming no interest in my property and repay the remaining $21,000 in monthly installments in exchange for me not pressing criminal charges. It was a slap in the wrist, but Sam advised taking the guaranteed money. "The goal is to secure your future, Miriam, not to punish them. This does that." I signed the agreement. The first payment never came. Instead, a letter from a lawyer in Arizona arrived. Chloe and Mark had filed for bankruptcy and were relocating to Phoenix for a fresh start. The debt to me was dissolved. They were walking away, scorched earth behind them. I felt a pang, not for the money, but for the final, absolute severing. She had chosen to flee rather than make amends. She was gone. That summer, Leo graduated with honors. He got a fantastic internship in Chicago. The night before he left, we had dinner in my garden, surrounded by the peonies Ben had loved. Fireflies punctuated the twilight. "I have something for you," I said, handing him a large envelope. He opened it, his eyes scanning the first page of the trust document. "Grandma, this," he said. "The cottage is in the trust, the investments, everything. You are the successor trustee and the sole beneficiary. It's all yours when I'm gone, but more importantly, it's protected. From her, from anyone. It's our family, Leo, what's left of it, and I'm giving it to you to care for." Tears filled his eyes. "I don't want it yet. I want you for a long time. You have me. This just means you also have this place. Keep it. Fill it with your own family someday. Remember the good that was here. That's the real inheritance." The following Christmas, I strung the lights myself. I baked the gingerbread. Agnes and a few friends from the library came over. We drank store-bought eggnog, laughing about its inferiority. Leo called from Chicago, his voice bright with plans to visit in the spring. The house was full of warmth, of chosen family. I was sitting by the tree that night, after everyone had left, looking at the ornaments, a clumsy clay angel Leo made in first grade, a delicate glass bell from Ben and my first Christmas, and a shiny new one from Agnes. The silence was rich and peaceful. I had fought the quiet war in my own home, and I had won. Not a dramatic, explosive victory, but a deep, lasting one. I had reclaimed my sovereignty. The next morning, I woke early. I made coffee and took my mug to the porch. The old maple tree in the front yard stood stark and beautiful against the gray sky, its branches tracing intricate patterns of resilience. I was 68. I had loved and lost. I had been betrayed by my own blood. I had stood my ground, and I was here, in the quiet dawn of a new day, free. My story is one of many, a story of a mother and a daughter, of trust broken and a self reclaimed. If you've ever had to rebuild your walls after someone you loved tried to tear them down, I see you. Tell me your story in the comments below. You are not alone. And if this kind of quiet strength speaks to you, subscribe to the channel. There are more truths to be told here, more mornings to be reclaimed. Stay with me.